It's now time for the mayoral debate. I think the one that everybody's most excited about. The two people on stage are running to be the first ever mayor of Framingham. They are yeah, clap for that. They are seated in order from left to right as they would be seen on the ballot top to bottom. I will introduce them now and ask that they rise when I call their names. John Stefanini.
Thank you.
Dr. Yvonne Spicer.
Thank you.
The moderator for today's debate is Joanne Berry. Joanne is a member of the Acton Area League of Women Voters and has served on the board of League of Women Voters of Massachusetts and the trustees of the Scharfman Fund. Joanne has moderated many candidate forums in the area, including local offices, State House and Senate, Massachusetts Auditor and Treasurer, and the United States Congress. Please welcome Joanne Berry.
Thank you. First of all, you've gotten your applause out till the end, please. Don't, it might be exciting, your candidate may give an exciting response, but please don't applaud during it because that'll take away from the time for questions and stuff. So our rules for today, we will have a series of questions where each candidate will have a 1-minute response. And then we'll have another series of questions where they will be able to have a period of rebuttal for 30 seconds. I would say response instead of rebuttal. They may not rebut. And of course, we have a 1-minute time limit. Our timers are right down front here, and we'll give the signal right where the candidates can see it, and I'm sure they will keep to time. And we'll, of course, be respectful during the whole thing. I have no doubt of that. So after a 1-minute opening statement, I will ask the questions. The questions have come from the League of Women Voters, MetroWest Daily News, and from the public in general. So there's a good mix of sources for the questions. They'll have 1 minute to respond. No rebuttals at first, and in the second round there will be. And I think that is it. So let us begin with opening statements for 1 minute. Mr. Stefanini.
4 underperforming schools, a $300 million budget, 3 vacant shopping plazas, and increasing property taxes. Even with my 30 years of experience at the highest levels of government in state and local, these tasks are daunting. I can't imagine what it's like and how daunting it is for someone who has never crafted a budget or managed municipal managers. Dr. Spicer, I was stunned when you revealed to the news after spending 6 months telling people you're the vice president of a $63 million entity, that you are vice president of a division with $350,000 and no direct reporting employees. We need and deserve more, better. Framingham needs a qualified and proven leader. And I hope through the conversation that we have today that we will have an enlightening and opening conversation about what each of us bring to this table and what we can do to make our community a better place.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
Thank you, League of Women Voters and the MetroWest Daily News for this opportunity to speak to the voters of Framingham one more time. I'm Yvonne Spicer, and I'm running to be your mayor. The best interest of the people of Framingham will always be my objective. We are about to embark on a new form of governance. We need a fresh new voice with new ideas. I'm not a politician, and I'm proud of that. Old politics and old politicians will not do. I am transparent, honest, and trustworthy. You can count on me to be inclusive, work collaboratively, and to ensure that the people's voice is heard in this community. I am not beholden to any special interest, and I will be the people's mayor.
Thank you. Our first question Framingham's budget is approaching $300 million, and many taxpayers want city government to more tightly control spending. Please give an example of a time when you reduced expenses from a budget over which you had control. Dr. Spicer.
Thank you. We've had many different job situations where I have had to make some very tough decisions about budget. And when it came to having to reduce staff, that was a very difficult time for my community. And I had to do that even though I knew that it would impact someone's livelihood. So I've had to reduce budgets. Now, through some very creative planning and effective adjustments within the community, and I'm speaking specifically of my time in Newton Public Schools, we were able to restore that position. So when you're thinking about budgeting, you have to think very smartly about where the resources are coming from. You have to think very smartly about ways in which you can actually adjust budget and make it much more equitable for everyone across the board, and that's what happened in this situation.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
I've had the pleasure in the public sector and the private sector of managing tens of millions of dollars of budgets and voting on billions of dollars in budgets my entire career. When I was a selectman here in the 90s, we had tough fiscal years. We had to consolidate 11 health insurance plans into 4. We saved $1 million too. We did an early retirement, reducing our workforce, saving millions of dollars. We went from EMTs to paramedics, saving $650,000 a year, all while opening a new school. So yes, we can take and we can control our budgets. We have to do top to bottom review. We have to be prepared to have the tough conversations, which I'm not afraid of. We have to be prepared to look each other in the eye and have candid dialogue about how we begin to look at the tough decisions in front of us. I've done that. I'm prepared to do that again. We have same needs today with our burgeoning school populations, our increasing capital needs. We need to do the same thing all over again, and I'm prepared, after 17 years in the private sector, to bring fresh, bold ideas to our government to make our community a better place.
Thank you. Next question. Framingham's first mayor will be entitled to receive an annual salary of more than $187,000, which is more than Boston Mayor Marty Walsh receives each year. If elected, will you accept the full salary? If so, why do you believe that level of compensation is deserved? Mr. Stefanini.
So the Charter Commission set the compensation for the mayor, as they did in Weymouth, Braintree, and other communities, as the same exact salary as the town manager to be cost neutral. I believe the $187,000 is too high. I am prepared to accept what the City Council, through its analysis and review, sets as the limit, and I will donate the difference to local charities or local school activities so that the salary is appropriate.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
Consistent with the charter, the salary was set. This is also a salary that is consistent with some of the going rates of which you think about leadership and an executive leadership type of role. And part of evaluating what that salary will be, I will look carefully at any ways that we can maybe adjust the salary, but also making sure that we are being consistent and fair for equitable work. Because one thing for sure, you will have me 24/7 as your mayor.
Thank you. Next question. We have heard all about the qualifications that would make you a great mayor. What are a couple of things that you think you need to improve on to be a great mayor? Dr. Spicer.
I think one of the things that is probably my strength and weakness at the same time is that I lead with my heart. And I am passionate about any and everything that I endeavor upon. And part of thinking about being a great leader is really knowing how to be compassionate. And that's one of the things that I look at, because you know what, everything is not always black and white. There's some gray area. And part of being able to lead with your heart, you're able to see that gray area and sometimes make adjustments, given that everyone is not coming at the table with the same set of circumstances or the same set of opportunities. So that is my strength and my weakness, is leading with my heart.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
Thank you. I listen and learn as part of the process of decision making, which we all do. And while I work tirelessly, while I pride myself in returning my emails and phone calls and talking to just about anybody, people who agree with me, people who disagree with me. I appoint people who work with me, who vote for me, who don't vote for me, who work against me. And I would say that's a strength. But I would say I feel like every time I listen, there's someone else to listen to. So I think we need to put mechanisms in place and tools like using our phones and our applications to generate more information about what people want in our community. So we're talking to more people. There are more demographically new people in our community that need to be part of our conversation. So while I think I'm inclusive and I listen to people, I think I need to work harder to listen to more and include more in the process, in decision making.
Thank
And
you.
learn Portuguese too, by the way.
Thank you.
More.
The next question is your opportunity to ask each other a question. So please don't make your question longer than the answer will be, which is what I always say to people when the audience gets to ask questions. So, Mr. Stefanini.
So, Dr. Spicer, over the past 2 decades prior to running for mayor, you've been silent when Yuri Stamps was shot, when immigrants were bullied, when contaminated sites were ignored, when marriage equality was challenged, poverty was threatening equal opportunity amongst our young kids, when accountability was in short supply and half our community had no representation in our community. And you've not volunteered for a single community group or committee. Even more surprisingly, you've not voted in 12 consecutive Framingham elections. Why have you been completely absent or silent from our civic and community affairs of Framingham for the past 2 decades prior to running for mayor?
First and foremost, your statement is riddled with inaccuracies and riddled with accusations and impugning of my integrity, which is far from what I would expect from you. It is unbecoming of our state representative, Mr. Stefanini. I have been civically involved in this community for many years. Right now, Framingham is about to participate in yet another project my organization is running. As far as being able to make sure that Framingham is front and center. I've been a town meeting member. I've been a representative to the Democratic State Convention. I've worked with the Boys and Girls Club. I've made sure that Framingham has had an opportunity at all levels of state government. Funding to Framingham for almost $20,000 in savings for this community for teachers to participate in a groundbreaking STEM program in the state. So I've contributed to Framingham.
Thank you. And now it is your opportunity to ask Mr. Stefanini a question.
Mr. Stefanini, you take credit for everything from your time as one member of a board of selectmen. In fact, you should be sharing the credit with Phil Ernst, John King, Mike Rossi, Kathy Pendergrass, Val Mulvey, Chris Petrini, and Dennis Cardiff. Can you give us a specific example of a job in which you had been solely responsible for hiring, firing, and building and managing a budget?
That's great. So first of all, it was a 3-member board of selectmen that has all the firing, hiring powers, budgeting responsibilities of our mayor. So I've done this job. The Hall Street Fire Station and the Boys and Girls Club, I personally raised and called the $1.2 million that was necessary and built the coalition within the Latino community to bring the Boys and Girls Club to Framingham. The Cushing Hospital Park, I personally chaired the Cushing Hospital Task Force, the Board of Selectmen, and was the state representative that negotiated directly with Bill Weld, and it was the only hospital in the state that was not closed, preserving 100 acres. I personally sought for and negotiated with the state on the creation of the Merchant Road Soccer Complex and negotiated the terms of that agreement that enabled us to have a soccer complex for our kids. I personally fought and worked with the EMS and ER people to bring paramedic level service here to our community and worked with the folks involved. So I have not been a bystander. I have been an active part of the community, and I always share credit.
Thank you. Next question. There has been a significant amount of civic engagement throughout this election from both candidates and residents. How will you ensure these people stay engaged even if they do not support your candidacy for mayor? Dr. Spicer.
Thank you. Civic engagement, as I alluded to, has been very important to me. And even though I am been in creating and building programs while not necessarily serving in an office in town government, that does not limit my civic engagement. For example, working with the Greater Framingham Community Church on building capacity for girls in STEM education, working with the Boys and Girls Club, and it's a national project that actually brings some resources for STEM education to the community. I've been a member of the Human Relations Committee, and so part of that is also looking at how do we create the avenue for other people to stay involved. That is the one thing that is so difficult because it's been a challenge for people to find a place where they fit in. I look forward to making sure that all people that are involved right now and those that are not have an avenue to participate in town government.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
I am so excited about what's going on in Framingham. The level of civic engagement is incredible. We've gone from sleepy municipal elections and discussions to active engagement where we have a debate in Nevins Hall. I think that's pretty exciting for us. And I will do what I've done in the private sector and the public sector, which is listen to and work with everyone. Anyone who followed the recent charter discussion knows that I listened and spent hours talking to people who were never going to vote for the charter or that were not supportive of me or the efforts going on. That's what leaders do. They don't talk about being diverse. They don't talk about involving other people. They actually do it, and I've done that my entire life. It's an important part of how we as a community incorporate people. So I would look at decision making, as I always have, as what is in the best interest of our community. And when you look at what's in the best interest of our community, that means you have to include voices from every single part of our community and every walk of life within it.
Thank you. Next question. One fear expressed by opponents of the new city charter is that it will open the door for money to influence politics. Both of you have raised significant sums of money to run for mayor. With so much talk about transparency in the city government, what steps will you take to show residents that donors will not have undue influence over decisions you make about such things as development, appointments, and ordinances? Mr. Stefanini.
So money in politics is a reality of the world we live in. In the charter, we put in the toughest campaign finance rules possible, requiring regular appointment. We put in place the toughest ethics reporting requirements so that everyone knows where everyone is and what everyone's doing. But let's be clear about something. We're a small community. If you're going to govern in a small community, you have to be able to say no to a family member and yes to an enemy. You have to be able to look someone in the eye and work with everyone. I'm proud to have the support of small business owners and local businesses and community activists and neighborhood folks. The gentleman who is developing Millwood is someone I've known in Framingham for a long time. I went up to him and told him the town should purchase the property. I told every single person I could speak to and worked with town meeting members to make clear we should buy the property. Now he's purchased the property. That's his right. But that doesn't change my perspective and my issue in terms of dealing with him. And so yes, we have to deal with everybody, but we have to put it on the table. Transparency has to be a practice, not a word.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
Throughout this entire campaign, I have been extremely transparent. I was the first to file my financial reports on the preliminary election as well as this current election. And I have raised every dollar, whether it be $5 or $500, one person at a time. And nearly 70% of my contributions have come from the people of Framingham, the people that want to make sure that the first mayor of this city is someone that is going to represent their interests and not the interest of big business. And I have done that with integrity and transparency throughout this entire campaign.
Thank you. How will voters know who has access to the mayor's office in the future? For example, if elected, will you keep a public visitor log? Do you believe your emails, text messages, and calendar should be available for inspection by the public? Dr. Spicer.
I'm glad you asked that question because it's a really good one. And part of my platform has been about transparent government. And clearly in my platform, there is an initiative, first of all, a 311 hotline where people can report problems, issues in their community, actually be able to tap into what's happening in town government. One of the other things is working on a strategic plan that is actually transparent and people can see what initiatives we're working on, when they're being done. And as far as me, I certainly feel that being able to have the dialogue with people is so important. And that is why in the platform, there is a provision to have community conversations, meeting with the public on a regular basis so they have an opportunity to voice their concerns. And certainly being able to be as transparent as I possibly can with them and also have access to me as much as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
So the two things you mentioned are required by law under the Freedom of Information Act, but we got to go so much farther beyond that. We have to bring government to people, not people to our government. I agree with the 311 app phone. I would also look at an application dedicated just to us to give citizens the ability to have input into our progress. We need to look at establishing neighborhood advisory councils the way Newton did. I've proposed that as a means of getting people involved in evaluating municipal services and development in their neighborhood. We need to look at visual budgeting like Arlington, which is an open source code program, to give everyone an opportunity to participate in the budgeting process. We need to look at Open Checkbook, which the Commonwealth has started so that anyone at any time can look at our checkbook and say, that's where my money is being spent. And yes, I do Facebook Lives and have pledged to do live opportunities for people to ask questions. People asking questions do change the answers to questions sometimes. And that is important for all of us. And that is transparency, not making an untested statement.
Thank you. Next question. At previous debates, you said you would hire a full-time sustainability coordinator. What are the top 3 things you would like this person to accomplish in 2018? Mr. Stefanini.
First, I'd like to see it reduce our carbon footprint by reducing our overall energy consumption. We voted to be a green city or town 5 years ago, but haven't taken the steps necessary to get there. We've gotten 10% reduction. We need to go to 20%. That means we need to look at solar panels on our flat roofs. It means we need to look at collective purchasing powers the way Greenfield and other communities have done so that homeowners have real choices for power. We need to look at our fleet of 350 vehicles and how we take and green it by bringing some electric vehicles. Our heavy vehicles need to look at CNG, which is readily available in a state-of-the-art facility nearby at the MWRTA. We need to look at our 3 contaminated sites and look at how we clean them up before the entities end up washing away their resources. We need to look at how we increase our recycling rates and how we as a community can advance reduction strategies as well as recycling. And lastly, I think we need to, as a community, begin to practice what we preach relative to plastic bags, water bottles, and the like.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
Well, recently, I was just endorsed by the Environmental League of Massachusetts, and that is for my commitment to making sure that Framingham is a greener community and making sure that Framingham is on the right track. And one of the things that I will certainly look at within town government, are there those places and people that could potentially work on this initiative a little more aggressively? I agree, reducing our energy consumption by 20%. That's been our target. Also thinking about ways in which we are doing things with recycling in a much more effective way where more people in the community are recycling. Approximately 17,000 households are recycling right now. We need to do a much better job at that. The other thing is thinking creatively about how do we educate the public about green technology? How do we educate the public about ways in which we are hurting our environment? And that is what I hope that a sustainability and energy coordinator will do within our community.
Thank you. Next question. How specifically will you improve public transportation and make the city more bikeable? Dr. Spicer.
Transportation is a challenge. I mean, I'm sure most of us spend a lot of time on the road just trying to get from A to B, and we can do a lot better. I'd like to see us reduce the number of cars on the road and actually think about public transportation. I have to give Senator Spilker great credit for expanding our service on our MetroWest Regional Transportation Authority. However, we don't have service on Sunday. Many of our seniors are saying that they need to have service on Sunday just to get around town. Also trying to think about ways in which we can use bike lanes and increase the number of bike lanes and bike paths, and actually getting out and doing more walking. We have become gridlocked in Framingham in many locations, and I think we can do a much better job at examining ways in which our traffic patterns, and also the charter does call for a traffic commission study. So we'll have to be looking at that carefully to look at some opportunities to alleviate some of the traffic congestion in the community.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Spicer, I'm glad that you're finally on board with Sunday service for the MWRTA, and it's important for seniors, but it's more important for our lower income population that works in retail and restaurants. And that's a great example of where we have a great service, but it's not consumer driven. So many of the consumers need the bus on Sunday, but don't have it available to them today. We need to, in this new traffic commission, which is a priority under the charter to be appointed right away, look at appointing citizens from across our community who are looking at traffic-based solutions on a one-by-one basis. And they're big ones that require structural changes, but there are local ones. The rails and the aqueducts are a great example for opening them up. We just spent $400,000 on a bike path on Dudley Road near Cushing that doesn't have handicap accessibility or wheel accessibility on either side of it. We need to be consumer-driven in terms of the way we look at it. Lastly, I would say that we need to look at pedestrian access for places like a walking path around Cushing,
Thank
Farm
you.
Pond.
Okay. The next set of questions, each candidate will have a 1-minute response and then a 30-second follow-up. First question. School choice is an important topic in Framingham, leading to increased busing expenses, traffic, and residents not being guaranteed a spot in the school closest to them. Where do you stand on school choice and why? Mr. Stefanini.
So school choice was adopted in part because of economic decision making. Because where our kids are, so 70% of our kids come from South Framingham, all but 4 of our schools are north of Route 9. If we're going to deal with and challenge school choice, we need to look at a plan that builds additional schools where our children are. We spend about $6 million a year on busing, which creates traffic problems and creates disruption and doesn't allow kids to play with their neighbors. I've walked around 8,000 doors personally in our community, and this is an active topic of discussion. It's not a decision for the mayor to make, but it's one that I will make sure is active and engaged with school decision makers so that we're having a robust dialogue as to how we deal with our additional schools and how we deal with the placement of our kids. This is important to not only the kids, but the relationships between the parents and the communities that they're part of.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
School choice was not about economics. It was about racially desegregation of Framingham, and that's how it came about. It also was about creating greater opportunities in our various schools. For example, all of the schools, the elementary schools, had themes, and that the teachers were trained in how to deliver those themes and deliver the curriculum through those themes. For example, the art school, right now currently Barbary, which is a 2-way bilingual program, that it was the impetus of school choice. Now, as you can see demographically across Framingham, all of the schools, the vast majority of the schools, are on the northern tier of Framingham. So buses will still have to move across this community unless in terms of balancing the number of students in schools. So it's a bigger issue that, yes, Dr. Tremblay does have to tackle, but I also wanted to set the record straight as I was here in Framingham when school choice came about.
Mr. Stefanini, 30 seconds.
That was not the case. It was more of a justification for not spending the money because the School Building Assistance Authority didn't exist at the time and we couldn't afford construction of new schools. Yes, it deals with racial imbalance, but racial imbalance has to be dealt with by a districting plan, whether it's at existing buildings or whether those buildings are by choice. That by itself does not have an impact on racial balance. The racial balance has to be dealt with by the school system, no matter where the schools are. It was, and I was active at the time, and I don't recall seeing you at that time or any time in the last 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Stefanini. Dr. Spicer, 30 seconds.
It's very interesting because I actually sat on the committee that actually developed school choice. So I'm sorry if you didn't see me. I'm sorry that you didn't see me because I was here in Framingham when it did occur. And also looking at the renovation of some of our school buildings, a lot of the funding did come because of the racial balancing of the schools. We got a 90% reimbursement on the revision of some of our schools, the high school.
Thank you. Next question. Economic development and new businesses are important for Framingham. What industries will be important to the city's economic future? How will you draw them to Framingham? Dr. Spicer.
Economic development, as mayor, is a critical component of where we need to be moving, and it is clearly one of the top priorities in my platform. As I have moved across this community and looking at our new businesses and trying to encourage and certainly support new businesses, for example, one of our new businesses in town, Avidia Bank, this is where I've chosen to input our campaign finance, open a finance part of our campaign in that bank because they were a new partner in this community, and they've already proven themselves not only an aggressive new partner, they're working with the school department. I am looking at more innovative businesses, incubator businesses that will come into this community that will also attract people from as far as outside of the community to be able to work and live in Framingham. This is so critically important to our community, is growing new business in the community that will anchor, especially in the downtown, will anchor some of our businesses downtown.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
This is the single most important role to a mayor. It protects and preserves our services, it provides relief to taxpayers, it provides jobs to our residents. I've spent 30 years inside and outside government working with the very people who invest and decide the jobs that we create. So I know this area and I know it well, and I know we can renovate our empty shopping centers, but we need to think about our economy. Our small businesses drive our local economy. So yes, we need to think about innovation and we need to think about workforce development in our Route 9 and larger places. But if we're going to renovate downtown Framingham, our 3 vacant shopping plazas, we need to be prepared to work with our small businesses, not shun them, not put platforms and people together who do not want to work with small businesses. We need to be prepared to look them in the eye. So I've been criticized by taking funds from small businesses. They're voters in the community. They're people who are part of our community, and they need to be part of the dialogue, or we are not ever going to make the kind of improvements. In Hudson recently,
Thank you. Dr. Spicer, 30 seconds.
Part of thinking about new business, first of all, I have traveled around this community, stopping in new businesses, listening very carefully to the business owners of what are they needing from their government. And many of them want to have access. They don't want to necessarily feel that if you don't know the right people, you won't get anything done. They want to make sure the process of starting a business is very transparent, that things are available in multiple languages. These are very small fixes, and as mayor, I promise you, I will take care of those things.
Mr. Stefanini, 30 seconds.
so why did you decline to talk to the Rotary or the Small Business Association, which represent the leaders in these very communities? Why haven't you met with the leaders of these group of people to listen to the concerns they have? The hundreds of small businesses in this community formed organizations because this community today is not listening, and many of the people leading your campaign are the people who are leading that lack of listening.
Next question. Residential development is one of the most heavily, probably it's hotly too, one of the most heavily debated issues in this election. New growth will generate tax revenue, but some residents feel there are too many projects in the pipeline, threatening to increase traffic and strain government services. How will you guide residential development in the city? Mr. Stefanini.
So, after decades of an apartment ban in our community, we've opened up and done transportation-oriented development in our downtown, which is a very positive thing. It's something that other communities did 14 years before us. But in that year, 18-month period of time, we have permitted or put in the pipeline more than 1,000 units. I have proposed a 6-month moratorium, as did Marlborough, to slow down to make sure the units that are integrated are done wisely and carefully. The details matter. At the same time, to make sure that we're evaluating the decisions we've made, to make sure that the areas and places where we're building these units is in fact where we want to proceed. It's part of our growth strategy as it has been in Natick and Hudson and Waltham and Marlborough, but it has to be done in a thoughtful way. And we need to put the brakes on it ever so slightly without slowing down the growth that occurs in our community so that we can make those decisions thoughtfully.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
The growth of our apartments in our community has to be very smart in the terms of how do we allow for housing for our seniors, our veterans, and our young people. My biggest concern is that our young people are being priced out of the ability to stay in this community. They can't work here, they can't live here, and that is a huge concern. The other part of this is thinking about all of the development and the impact that it has on our services, on our municipal services, water, sewer, traffic. All of that has a consequence. As I start to also look at the development of all of these apartments, we have apartments but no services, no mixed-use services, no grocery stores, no dry cleaners. How is that going to impact where we're going to move throughout this community? And that is one of the reasons why I do believe that we need to take a moment and take a moratorium and stop with the development for a bit to analyze and think critically about the impact.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini, 30 seconds.
So I'm glad you agree with that. That's important. We as a community do need to take a deep breath and figure that out. The two developments proposed in downtown Framingham that have been approved have yet to break ground, yet to secure all their financing. These projects are fragile, and thinking through all the details, I worked with Governor Romney, and I've had the pleasure over the last 3 decades to work and call each of the last 7 governors friends, colleagues, to work with their staff and the people around them, the very people we need to talk to get projects moving, to create economic development,
Thank you.
and to solve our problems.
Dr. Spicer, 30 seconds.
It's about us in this community, and it's not outside the community. And I think first and foremost, we have to decide critically as a community what is going to be best for Framingham. And is this development smart development in the locations we need it to be in? And also, does it think about mixed use? Because I think without thinking about mixed use, we're missing the mark in thinking about 21st century types of planning and city planning.
Thank you. Next question. The charter allows the mayor to make over 100 appointments to boards, commissions, and committees. Describe in detail the process you would go through in making your appointments. Dr. Spicer.
First and foremost, the charter does allow for 160 appointments, roughly about 160 appointments. Right now, some of these positions are already filled. What I would be looking carefully at is the composition of all of these different committees and places where I could actually appoint new people to the group. I would certainly advertise widely for opportunities, and not just our traditional way of in the newspaper or on the website, but really reaching out to those communities that typically have not participated in town government. That is where it becomes critically important to recruit those that are linguistically diverse, those that are ethnically diverse, disabilities and abilities, being able to make sure that it does reflect Framingham, because that is one of our biggest challenges, is that a number of our committees have not reflected all of Framingham.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
Our committees today most definitely do not reflect the diversity of our community. That's why the charter requires the mayor to make appointments that represent the diversity. That's why the charter requires the council, the names to be submitted to the council and for the council to approve. We need to have the broadest possible process to reach out and include people. That means the mayor needs to reach out and go to groups, go into the community, and solicit people to be engaged and involved. That's especially difficult in some of our lower income communities, some of our language barrier communities, where they do not feel like people are talking to them today. They most definitely feel disenfranchised. And we need to think about how we accommodate them at meetings, whether or not that's providing daycare or pizza, whether that's about specific locations or times of day in terms of how we convene and hold our meetings. But we make our best decisions when we listen to each other and work together collaboratively.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer, 30 seconds.
I don't think it's that difficult to reach out to people. When I worked in Framingham, they told me they couldn't find any women to teach tech ed. I found 4. I think you've got to be very willing, and you have to also roll up your sleeves and get in there and find the people you want to participate. as always, I think making sure that people can access town government and city government in a way through language, whether it's sign language, whether it's in different language having materials, I think that's critically important. And also making sure that you don't have just one person of another, but multiple people so they feel like they have a cohort.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini, 30 seconds.
It's not difficult, yet in this campaign, you've done very little to reach out to the leaders in the Brazilian community, the Latino community, the leaders in small business. They're part of our community and deserve a seat at the table. We need to have broader conversation with folks beyond immigration. Dealing with, in particular, the Portuguese-speaking population in our community, they want to be part of conversations about traffic and business and schools and how we make our community a better place. They do not feel like they're part of the conversation today.
Next question. One responsibility of Framingham's first mayor will be to work with lawmakers and state government to advance the community's interests. Name one strategy you will pursue on the state level to benefit Framingham. Mr. Stefanini.
So I've had the privilege of serving in the legislature. I've had the privilege of working and calling each of the last 7 governors on a first-name basis and working with them on policies and initiatives for our community. Why is that important? Because each of their staffs and the people around them now populate the agencies of government, the not-for-profits that issue the grants, that fill the very seats that make decisions. So when we need to take a 14-month bridge project and put it back into a 4-month bridge project, I know who to call and how to deal with it. When we have 3 contaminated sites that are stalled, I can tell you who to call, what to do, and how to put that on track. When we need economic development incentives to turn our community around, I again know the players and the people to do that. And when I am Framingham's mayor, that will be Framingham's seat at the table.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
We have a very strong leadership team that represents us at state government, and I am very proud to be able to feel like I can pick up the telephone and call any one of them, Karen Spilka, Chris Walsh, and Jack Lewis. Also, I have had a great pleasure of working with Congressman Kennedy for a number of years on the statewide STEM Council. Joe is a great friend. Joe is an advocate, and I know Joe cares deeply about education. He cares deeply about workforce development. So I feel like I have a partner in this work, and certainly sitting on a number of state boards. I sit on the statewide STEM Council, and I was appointed by Governor Charlie Baker and previously appointed by Governor Deval Patrick. So I have that opportunity to connect with those at state leadership and do it in an effective way to benefit Framingham.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini, 30 seconds.
Dr. Spicer, you talk about transparency, but the STEM board that you sit on the state level that meets twice a year, of which you don't even sit on the executive committee, has never had a meeting with the governor. I'm not one of 4,800 people who got a rubber-stamped signature from the governor. I can call Charlie Baker because I have his cell phone. I work with him, as I did with Mitt Romney and Deval Patrick and Bill Weld and Paul Salucci and Mike Dukakis. We need to be transparent and honest with people. Access and a seat at the table means you know the issues, you know the people, and you know the players.
Dr. Spicer, 30 seconds.
You know, Mr. Stefanini, in terms of how you characterize and try to besmudge my integrity, my commitment to education, my commitment to work, and the relationships I've cultivated, I've been there. I've been advised. I've been a part of every single initiative in this state as it relates to STEM education. So I'm pretty proud of my record. It's not just an opportunity to hang out, it's a seat at the table, and it's a part of the decision-making process.
Thank you. Next question. Many Framingham residents struggle to afford food and shelter. Organizations such as the United Way of Tri-County, the Salvation Army, and Daniel's Table help hundreds of low-income families each week. But it's clear many in Framingham are still struggling to survive. What is your plan for addressing homelessness, hunger, and substance abuse? Dr. Spicer.
This is an issue that we have to take the veil off. It's easier to say it happens downtown, it happens down there, but it happens throughout our entire community. And we as a community need to be better shepherds of all of our people. I have walked all through downtown Framingham. I've walked on the north side of Framingham. And yes, we have homeless people. Yes, we have people that are struggling. I know what struggle feels like. See, I grew up struggling. But I also know how to roll my sleeves up and help someone. And that is something that we as a community have to work on together. It's not just one entity, Salvation Army or Daniel's Table or SMOC, that has to deal with this. We as a whole community have to think collectively, whether it's homelessness, how do we find housing and dignity for people, because at the end of the day, it's about people's dignity. And nobody wants to be homeless. Nobody wants to be hungry. People want an opportunity, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure that they have one.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
I agree. My mother, who was a school nurse at Woodrow Wilson, each and every day took her Framingham State bag and filled it with food and combs and brushes and underwear and jackets, and every day it came home empty. Fighting hunger is an important part of how we deal with our underserved population. It's how we deal in part with our 4 underperforming schools to make sure our kids are prepared for our schools, just as our schools are prepared for our kids. We need to partner with our local corporations and entities to get their foundations. I was proud to be part of the group that set up and founded the MetroWest Health Foundation, which deals with a lot of these issues. We need to bring awareness around it. In a lot of communities, they do an annual survey and a census. It's a good way to do that. We need to remove the stigma that's attached to it, and we need to work to bring dialogue. I'm proud to have been part of groups to deal with affordability and housing in our community over the past couple of decades. This is a problem in our community.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
I would add that I certainly would like to work very closely with our superintendent to ensure that there are opportunities for kids to have food to go home for the weekend. A number of communities have done this in backpacks full of food where kids don't have meals at home. And there's hunger in this population, whether it's legitimately homeless people, but also those that are just hungry. Making sure that kids get breakfast in the morning at school. These are important ways in that we can begin to start to tackle some of these issues, but we still have plenty much more work to do.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
I also think we need to lead by example. I'm proud to have served meals, to have volunteered to cook, to be part of community programming over the past couple of decades, because when people see you there, they want to be part of the conversation. We need to, as a role model, help and figure out how we can serve meals and reach out to this population. It helps remove the stigma that's attached in many instances, and it helps create networks of people to come into the process.
Thank you. Next question. That's the one we just had. Our police department has had several issues over the past few years, including an officer being charged with theft from the evidence room, an innocent man being shot to death by a police officer, and many officers filing lawsuits against the police department and/or the town. What steps would you take to resolve internal conflicts in the police department and ensure that policing is just and effective? Mr. Stefanini.
So this is a fundamental difference with my opponent. I believe our police department needs leadership and has some very significant crises. Our forfeiture dollars have been frozen, freezing millions of dollars in where we are at. Our databases are stored and housed in this building in violation of federal policy, creating access issues. You talked about the evidence room. You talked about issues that exist around the 2 civil rights suits that have been filed against the community. We need to be honest and put on the table that we have an issue and we need to deal with it. Those cases have jeopardized cases in our district courts against perpetrators because the evidence has become contaminated. We need to work with the leadership that exists within the men and women there. So 2 things. First of all, the men and women of the department deserve our praise. These things that we're talking about haven't impacted their ability to deliver services. Second of all, I'm proud to have the endorsement of the lieutenants and the sergeants and the leadership there because of my efforts and recognition in this area.
Dr. Spicer.
Our police are an integral part of our safety, and our safety in this community is paramount. Our trust, and I grew up trusting police. I grew up in a community where we had a neighborhood police officer that walked the beat. I also look at ways in which we've fallen down on the job in supporting some of the initiatives that the police have come forth with. I also see ways in which we need to get better. We get to hit the reset button come January 1. There's a lot of things that have happened in this community over the course of the years. And all of them, we can't go back and correct the wrongs. But what we can do is learn from the mistakes and move forward. I'm a staunch believer that everybody has an opportunity to be better and do better. And at the end of the day, it's about sitting at the table and talking with each other and coming up with better and effective solutions. And yes, so we're not in another situation or any other situation around being sued or around civil rights, because at the end of the day, it's us.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini, 30 seconds.
So to be clear, we have a special assistant that none of the previous 3 chiefs will acknowledge even appointing. Carries a badge and a gun and pulls people over without proper training. Same person has been charged with making racially charged statements about other officers and about our President of the United States, making homophobic comments. That's not the kind of person that I want to hit the reset button with. That's the kind of person that I want to see us as a community say that's unacceptable. And I would hope you would join me in saying that that behavior is unacceptable.
Dr. Spicer, 30 seconds.
I certainly feel that the behavior is unacceptable. But I also think the behavior has been unacceptable from people in your campaign with same kinds of racist, unfair kinds of attributions to me. So I think before we start pointing fingers, we need to come to the table, because this is deeper than about an incident. It's about a deep felt feeling or perception about groups of people. And I think we need to be honest about ourselves. We all need a little bit of work to be able to understand and work effectively together.
Thank you. We're almost done. You'll be able to applaud shortly. This is the final question for 2 rounds of response. We have an abundance of institutional neighbors in our soon-to-be city: 2 college campuses, MEMA, or the Mass Emergency Management Agency, a privately held hospital, a state prison, several religious orders, and so on. What are your thoughts on how these institutions can take more responsibility for adding value to our community, or potentially cover the costs of the services provided to them by Framingham? Dr. Spicer.
I think it's so important that we have so many of these assets in our community, and particularly looking at our colleges and universities. We have to do a much better job at partnering with them on initiatives. We have to do a much better job of kids understanding the relationships that we can build and the things that we can do within our community. I also look at the ways in which we have to understand that space becomes a real challenge for us in the community. And the space to be able to keep an institution like Mass Bay and Framingham, that's important to me, because everyone needs to feel that there's a step for them to get to the 2-year institution. That is so critically important to me.
Thank you. Mr. Stefanini.
So we have great institutions in our community. We do not have an institutional master plans for many of these. We need to work with them to make sure we do just that. We need to look at the state reimbursement formulas that you're talking about, which currently do not provide us adequate reimbursement, and we need to work with that. We need to work with the governor and the legislative delegation. We came very close to losing the $61 million for Mass Bay, and it's still in jeopardy. That requires relationships, knowledge, and details. Things I've spent 30 years working on and with at our state level and our local level. The details in these things matter. And so when you throw around your 36-page platform, which is 12 pages when you print it, and is filled with a lot of platitudes and few details other than those required by the charter, the people of Framingham need to know details. And this is an example where the details of getting Mass Bay to stay here are going to require us to build coalitions of business leaders, work with our governor, and work on the hard work of putting the details together.
Dr. Spicer, 30 seconds.
Whether you reduce the point size or not, it's still 11 more pages than you've put forth and put out for people to look at. And part of thinking about this, relationships are critically important. And part of having those relationships with Mass Bay or any other entity is understanding what are their needs and the ways in which we can ebb and flow. So it's also one of these situations where Mr. Stefanini has felt like he had the corner on making sure that we can keep business engaged. It's a partnership. I'm accustomed to doing partnerships.
Mr. Stefanini, 30 seconds.
So my website is filled with more details than your platform, and it's longer. I just don't call it a platform and market it. I actually do it. And once a week during this campaign, I released a statement and engaged the community in a dialogue while your campaign was sending out flyers attacking me and keeping negative campaigning at every single door. I was talking about how to fill improve 4 underperforming schools, 3 vacant shopping plazas, perform and keep our open spaces. The details are there.
Thank you. So before the last question before closing statements, ending on a positive note, what do you like about your opponent? Mr. Stefanini, that is your question first.
So I have great admiration for Dr. Spicer's work in STEM. I have a 22-year-old BU biology grad who's taken some STEM courses and has been the beneficiary of many of those things. I think that's valuable, and I do not question her background, her commitment, and the impact that she's had in that area. My questioning is not disrespectful, but I think the community needs to know when you say 13 months on the Ways and Means Committee and you've missed close to half the meetings, why you can't answer those questions. So yes, I respect Dr. Spicer, and the things we talk about are not meant to be disrespectful, but it's part of a transparent dialogue that we as a community need to have. I also respect Dr. Spicer as a person. I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Spicer in the late 80s during the Dukakis campaign and work together on that campaign and other initiatives. That doesn't mean that I can't ask questions respectfully.
Thank you. Dr. Spicer.
Mr. Stefanini loves this family, and that's something that I admire about him, because at the end of the day, in terms of being mayor of the city, it's really about the people of the city. And when I see that he is proud of his daughters, and his daughters are pursuing a career in STEM, which makes me happy, more women that are moving forward with a profession that has traditionally shut them out, that makes me smile. I also look at my record. My record is strong. You can't impugn my integrity because I've lived my life with honesty and integrity. So that is one of the things that I value deeply, and I also hold in high regard for other people. Come correct, tell the truth, not innuendos, not falsities, but come correct. Do not make up things that are not true about me.
Thank you. Before we go to closing statements, I would just like to, first of all, thank the audience members for coming and being so attentive and interested, because democracy doesn't work if you don't participate, and to the candidates for putting themselves out there. Sometimes campaigning is harder than actually doing the job, though I don't think so in this case, since it's a new position and everything. But each candidate now has 1 minute for a closing statement, and Dr. Spicer, you are first.
During this debate, we've covered a lot of ground. I'm the only candidate who will do the right thing, even when nobody's watching. I'm transparent, I'm honest, and I'm trustworthy. As your mayor, I will do what I say, and I will lead with integrity. I'm inclusive and will work collaboratively with others to ensure the people's voice is heard. As Framingham's first mayor, I will set the bar high, and I'm not beholden to any special interest group. This is so critically important. I get to set the tone for Framingham without any encumbrances. So on November 7th, I humbly ask you for your vote. Yvonne Spicer, the people's mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Stefanini, 1 minute.
I'm prepared to put my knowledge and passion for Framingham, its people, and its institutions. My 30 years serving local and state government in the public and private sectors at the highest level, and my tireless energy to work for the people of Framingham each and every day, negotiating our contracts, managing our $300 million budget, advocating with state and federal officials on our behalf, and leading us in a master planning process, giving a voice to those who do not have it. I envision a Framingham where all of our diverse neighborhoods are vibrant and thriving, displaying our values. A Framingham where we eagerly take our family to dinner on a Saturday night in downtown, consume local produce from our local farms, celebrate and protect our diversity, embrace local businesses, where everyone's voice is represented and heard, where all of our students in all of our schools are achieving and have an equal opportunity, a place we proudly call home. I ask for your consideration, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you. And thank you once again to the candidates. Michael.
Yes, thank you to the candidates and everybody out in the audience for being super respectful about the time and the quietness. The program moved along beautifully, and we finished a little early, so you can go out and enjoy the rest of the beautiful day. Thank you to our moderators, Margaret Copey and Joanne Berry. Don't forget to vote on November 7th. Visit vote411.org and framinghamelectioninfo.org to educate yourself about the candidates in all 4 races. Happy voting, everybody.